All right. Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. First, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today for this session. We are going to be talking about 6 ways to nail digital selling. Today, I am joined by a couple of awesome speakers. We have Kylie Fuentes, who is the VP of Product Management at Salesforce. We have Matt Gorniak, who is the CEO here at Threekit, and then Tony Lopez, who is a solution engineer here at Threekit as well. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So Kylie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
No worries. Well, good morning, everybody, and happy day back after a long weekend. I don't know how many of you are super familiar with Salesforce and the Salesforce platform. So before we jump into all the good stuff, we thought we'd do a bit of a level set. I think, the Salesforce name is synonymous with customer CRM, but we're more than that. I mean, really what we do is we unify all of those customer data points on the one business platform so that you've got that single view of your customer, regardless of whether or not you're talking about your sales touch points, your service touch points, your marketing touch points, etc. And because it's a platform, it also gives our customers the ability to then ultimately extend off that platform to then really create their own bespoke solutions based on their own business needs. And so really at its core, what we think we do better than anyone else is really putting the customer at the center of today's experiences. And the theme of today really is to explore that a little bit more and talk about how, creating delightful B2B customer experiences can lead to better business results, which I think in this day and age and with everything that's going on right now is probably more poignant than ever. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who's going to take the next slide.
Thanks, Kylie. And what's been fascinating to watch is the acceleration of the digital selling, and obviously, especially during current events, but even prior to that, it was accelerating. So whether we're thinking CPQ, B2B, B2C, it's quite interesting. And the other interesting thing is what we want to talk about in this webinar is that, yes, digital itself is a different experience, but there's also the experience within the experience, if that makes sense, right? Don't forget that. So kind of where this starts is buying is an experience. And this is where sort of our consumer lives come in. It's blending more and more. That's been blending for years now. And so keep in mind, in B2B as well, experience is the differentiator. And products want to be experienced. If you have products that are tangible, you want to experience them. So it's been really interesting because I've been in this space since 2004. And as mentioned, it's accelerated. And what we found is that product visualization, that experience is sort of a missing piece in this whole equation. And what's also fascinating for us was how do you solve it? And turns out that we had to lean on Hollywood special effects technology blended with enterprise software to arrive at the solution. More about that. But again, remember, there's a digital experience and there's also the product experience that's coming together. And with that, back to Kylie.
I mean, how amazing is it to have a slide with Tony Stark on there? I mean, they're way cooler than my pretty slides. So I think, it's interesting in the space that I operate in, at least, we talk to a lot of customers all the time around kind of their digital transformation journeys. And so a lot of the themes that we're going to talk about today, these are not new. These are not things that kind of have just sort of spun up, in the last 6 months as a result of COVID. They're actually themes that have been kind of structurally I think, shifting the landscape for B2B businesses for the last little while. And so these are absolutely what I would say are structural changes in the industry and things that, what we see across the board, our customers have been, planning to invest in to set them up for long-term success into the future. But what I will say is those who are kind of sitting on the fence a little bit are now kind of waking up and saying, wow, the future is 100% digital. It's no longer acceptable for me to kind of think about selling the way I used to before, because now how do I create those experiences in a world where, my customers are remote. I don't know the next time I'm going to be able to be face-to-face to be able to sell. And as we've seen at the kind of broader economic level, there's just a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace. And so a lot of customers are saying, well, hang on a minute, how do I shore up my revenue and create some predictability in my cash flow? And so As far as kind of what that looks like for us and some of the themes that we hear from our customers is, really this current landscape is accelerating some of these structural shifts that we've been seeing for the last little while, and really kind of doubling down on those is really kind of coming through as probably the clearest pathway to getting back to growth. And so when we unpack a little bit of like, well, what does that actually mean? And what are the ones that kind of really matter more than ever? I think there's a couple of things here. One, it's about kind of moving towards recurring relationships. So if you think about, where especially like CPQ customers have been in the past, a lot of it was around very complex one-time sale. But what we're seeing is, hey, that's awesome. And I still want to be able to do that. But increasingly, I want to be able to provide more value add to my customers, and I want to offer more solutions. And so how can I do that in a way that gives me more predictability or the ability to create recurring relationships? And so I start introducing things like recurring revenue models, whether that be, introducing a maintenance agreement or a warranty or, service contracts, those sorts of things that might be bundled together with the, that fixed good sale that I originally did. And so thinking about kind of the move from selling products to selling solutions is one of those structural shifts that we see. And as part of that move to recurring relationships and recurring business models. That's obviously very tightly connected with then, as a result, selling bundles, which obviously increases complexity of what we're selling, and it makes it a little harder for the sales rep to be able to navigate through that. And then, outside of the experience of the sales rep, there's how do you make that easy for the end customer, the buyer, right? And so we can come up with great solutions for the sales rep, but it's also just as important to make sure that that end user, that end customer has a delightful experience. And so that is true of both that one channel that they're interacting with you, maybe for that first time sale, but in a world where it's now about those recurring and ongoing relationships, it's just as critical to have that frictionless experience across your channels. So if you imagine, a scenario where maybe I sell you that tractor the first time and I do that via a direct sales channel and it's all wonderful and delightful, but maybe next time you want to be able to buy a part, or you want to make an amendment to your maintenance contract. And as a buyer, you want to go online to be able to do that. You don't want to have to sort of go in and do that with the direct sales rep. But yet you need to make sure that you have a seamless customer experience across all of your channels in order for that to happen. So we're seeing that as another big driver of where the innovation is coming from. And then I think the other one that is worthy of calling out is when you start moving to these recurring relationships and recurring business models, it's now no longer just about that one-time sale. It's really about that entire life cycle of the customer, which means all of a sudden controls and governance, not just with your sales rep, but also how that flows through to finance is increasingly important, because you want to be able to make sure that you have that single view of customer and that you obviously understand that sale all the way through to the invoice and cash collection all the way through, so that you always understand that customer status. And so we're seeing these sorts of things as being kind of really critical for companies who are looking to drive growth and rapid innovation. And as I said, in times of COVID, this has become even more important. And I think the other big thing that sort of maybe wraps around all of this is, how do I ensure I, minimize my revenue leakage along the way? And again, a lot of these different types of trends are really driven by that need of how do I maximize my deal profitability and minimize revenue leakage? And I think those are the two big business drivers that are driving some of these structural shifts. So
thanks, Kylie.
Next slide. Yeah. So, and that's all great. And that sounds amazing. And then there's the question of like, well, how do I do it? And I think this is where a lot of customers come to us and say, hey, this is where we're seeing some struggles. Because the reality is, and I always think this is kind of fascinating, and I know Matt's going to talk about this a little bit later on, but you know what? B2B selling, the reality of B2B selling is it is high touch, and it is highly personalized, and it is highly complex. But the reality is the innovation in B2B selling has probably historically been a little bit behind the innovation as it relates to B2C selling, right? If you compare that with B2C selling, which for me blows my mind, because I don't know about you, but you know, as far as every customer I've interacted with is also a consumer in their outside of work life. And so their expectations of what shopping is like and what that buying experience is like is no different. But yet for some reason, you know, in the B2B space, we've not really crossed the chasm to say, how do we kind of really meet the customer expectations or exceed them? Which I think is super poignant, because as I said, B2B selling is even, I mean, you know, the investments are higher, the decision-making process is usually more involved, and it's much more customized and personalized. So there's no excuse for B2B selling to be less than consumer selling. And so what we see, you know, and I'm not going to read to you the slide here, but you can see some of the areas where, as a result of disparate systems and as a result of kind of not thinking through end-to-end customer experiences, we end up creating fragmented touch points for customers. And so this is, you know, one of the areas that we see our customers really doubling down on.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think it's actually super insightful because, as you laid out, right, B2B is complex by its very nature, especially if you're looking for a recurring relationship, which is the one you should be looking for by nature of the products being sold. At the same time, we just can't help it. We do judge it as on a consumer experience as a buyer. And so we have seen the same, which is B2B is rushing to e-commerce via CPQ, via B2B commerce itself, due to COVID, or just in general, it's what customers are asking for. And on top of that complexity is the expectation of, hey, make it a great experience for me. That's where visuals actually play in if you have tangible products, which is super, a little bit obvious, but kind of not, because it sometimes gets forgotten in the midst of all the pulling all the stylists together, all that complex data on products, which is at the end of the day, right, the customers want to buy something. They want to make sure it fits their needs. And there is different dimensions, right? There is things like, is it the right, and as simple as color is in many ways a very big decision in many products. Is it the right configuration, the right ports, the right outlets, the right size specifications? These have to be answered as well. And the easier you make that, in addition to the process being easy, the more the acceleration of selling or buying is tremendous, because customers get what we would call digital trust. This is the product as if it's almost sitting next to me that I want. I'm here to buy it. And if I don't have that data, I just have to poke around more. I have to look for more phone calls, more web, more conference calls or Zooms, or meet me on site to figure that out. So here's the stats. The average expectation of images or visualization is tripled, quadrupled what we want in the buying process. And if I get what I want, I'm 11 times more likely to move ahead with the purchase. And by the way, this is also B2B, not just B2C, because again, it's converging, right, at the end of the day. And I think where COVID really forced that issue is that you may not be able to see the sales rep in person now. And we've seen this with products that have been brought in with samples to doctors' offices, no longer can be seen. But when they see what they want, they'll move on it. And we also expect it to stay that way in terms of the images being a big, powerful part, because when over at some point, ideally, we can deal with the society. There is certain advantages to getting what you want digitally over time spent in personal meetings.
Cool. So we're going to kind of move away from, I guess, the abstract and the theoretical and get into some of the nitty gritty stuff now, which I know what you're here to talk about. So with that in mind, let's jump into what we've called out as kind of the 6 ways that we think you can nail your selling and buying experiences and kind of really latch on to that building of recurring relationships with your customers. So the first one, and we sort of alluded to this one already, but I think the big thing here is moving away from selling a single product to selling a solution. And Matt's going to talk a lot more about that, because a lot of the stuff that the guys at Threekit are doing allows you to really offer up those solutions and move to a more, or sort of almost collaborative way of engaging with your customer. But as part of that, it's really about saying, hey, think about all of the other things that are adjacent to that product that I sell that might provide pathways to ongoing relationships with your customers and provide that additional value add. So some of the things we see our customers kind of really introducing things like, for example, technical support, warranties, the addition of spare parts, upgrade kits, all of these sorts of things allow you to move into business models like subscriptions or usage-based, which is a great way of introducing more predictability and ongoing revenue streams into your bottom line. And so everybody knows the CFO loves that, especially in times of COVID.
Always.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the first one. And we'll see a little bit more about that, but I think probably one of the big important ones. So then the question is, all right, great. So if I want to move towards this idea of recurring revenue models, how do I put that into practice? And really the big thing here is oftentimes we see introducing these new revenue streams is oftentimes really difficult for customers, especially because you want to be able to, adapt and introduce these new products or these new SKUs with a lot of speed and agility. And when we unpack why that becomes a problem for customers, oftentimes it's driven by legacy architectures where they have, oftentimes they'll have, different product catalogs or price books for different channels. They will have almost effectively a different customer record for, the different sales channels, which makes it really difficult for you to be able to then think about how you can do like contextual upselling or trigger out, certain things based on usage, etc. So that's one of the challenges that we see. And so one of the biggest roadblocks that our customers often tell us about in terms of moving to recurring revenue is really thinking about how they can connect all of their siloed systems. And that's, obviously from Salesforce's perspective, where Salesforce CPQ and billing can help because it really does specialize in solving these sorts of problems for our customers. But I think the other thing that, we always talk to customers about at length is this is not just about changing your technology systems, because fundamentally what you're doing here is you're changing business process. Right. And so what you're doing is you're saying, hey, all of a sudden it's now no longer about that one-time sale and then kind of just handing it off to finance to hopefully get paid. It's about saying, I'm going to manage that customer the whole way through their life cycle with me. And that means, guess what? My invoice is now part of the customer experience. And so when that customer wants to find out about, hey, I have a question about my invoice, my sales rep should be able to answer that. I should be able to log on online and see the status of my, my balances. And so thinking about those end-to-end touch points across the board is really important. It obviously has a technology implication, but it has a huge business process change, right? And so what we see is sales teams and finance teams and AR teams, et cetera, all really need to use this as an opportunity to start thinking about how you think customer-centrically end-to-end. There's no such thing anymore as finance being back of house.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Kylie. And as was, switching to the this slide, I would say it is actually really interesting. I don't think it's as stark as this, but I still talk to organizations where I think they're still being thought about, like, what is our recurring relationship? But what is that? Whereas I would say I would urge them to move faster, because the ones that figure that out, and many are, as a customer, that's the experience you want, right? I want you to think of me as a long-term relationship, where there comes all the things you talked about, the systems and everything else. But anyway, if you don't know what the answer is, you need to have to step on the pedal. And one other thing I also would encourage the audience, and in general, like secret shopper, some B2C does, when it comes to my favorite topic, which is quoting B2B and visuals, is like, it would be interesting for you to shop yourself your own process to the degree you can. Because I'm taking over from Kylie, and I totally agree with everything she's saying in the visual aspect of CPQ, let's say, the first slide. But if you don't have a CPQ system in place, you're already steps behind in the experience, because the things I'm about to talk about, your team is at this point spending time trying to internally piece together a piece of information to provide your basic answer, which is a quote. So once you have a system in place that pulls all these different silos together, you can do it in minutes But on top of that, I'm going to layer to you on that what the customer now expects is also a very rich and dynamic experience. So anyway, here's where I take off on that. Our proposal to you is to think of your sales reps as a trusted advisor and guide in this process. So now you have a CPQ system in place, you've got Salesforce in place, you're able to quickly pull together product, all this information, cut through all the silos. But on top of that, now, especially during COVID and beyond, this is going to stay, you're able to now with Threekit, 3D AR, to take that process and make it collaborative. So in this example, we'll show you a demonstration. Let's pretend we're selling these point of system solutions here that are, in the GIF kind of showing back and forth. I'm able to now, let's say, Kylie, you're my customer. You're going to be a large chain that franchises and needs these. I'm able to jump on a web conferencing system. I'm able to not, by the way, sending a quote that's complex is a minor miracle already by itself if you don't have a system in place like Salesforce, but now I'm able to collaborate. We can talk about, in this case, maybe colors are important. You may have a certain look and feel in the franchisees. I'm making this up a little bit here, but if that's important to you, we can configure, we can discuss. By the way, there's a little QR code that shows up, and we'll show you that all detail, but we can now collaborate with third parties, send this to maybe an approver or someone in the restaurant, and literally put that specific configuration, that picture perfect representation of exactly what we're talking about into my environment. Maybe my counter's not big enough, and so forth and so on. Looks trivial and simple, but these are big decisions for me, right? Because Kylie's buying for hundreds of restaurants. And so I wanted to show you the art of the possible today, which is basically take CPQ, make it something very collaborative, dynamic, where we can work on something together. And by the way, ideally, Kylie values my trusted advisorship because I can help her guide to this first complicated, potentially biggest purchase he'll make with us at the very beginning. So that's the beginning of our relationship. Let's move on to the next slide. But Kylie is picking up very fast. They're buying a lot from us, right? The initial stages of me working with her and her team were very hopeful. Hopefully, she'll say that. She'll give me a good review. But ongoingly, the relationship is ongoing in a sense of like, she wants to be met on her own terms, meaning, hey, I know your products. I can self-service. I can buy more accessories, add-ons. In this case, it's a barista high-end coffee machine. So, you know what, give me a way to self-service. Let me be my own guide. So this is where digital selling is also super crucial to pull us together. But this is where the visuals, representation, ability to make it seamless, ability for Kylie and her team to self-service, not just picking the quote unquote parts, but all the colors, all that stuff that's so important to accelerate decision-making processes and placing into her environment comes into play. Because if we do this right, she has a wonderful relationship with Matt, the other Matt, that's the sales guide, if you will, but also herself at midnight, her team, maybe something's needed, they need to buy 100 more of these, they can do it themselves without having to call anybody. And so she'll value that, customer status way up. By the way, also, if you get what you see is what you get, returns go way down, because literally that barista machine, that color, that nozzle, all these little details that she will care about, like ad nauseum and study it, is exactly what they're going to get. So very, very powerful combination, again, in the ongoing relationship. I will show you that, a demonstration of that. But let's move on to another topic, which is, in this case, and we're flipping products on you, Kylie. Now you also want lawnmowers, I guess, so that's cool. We'll have some fun with that. But let's just kind of pretend that's also needed, that you purchased lots of these from us. And now there's something very interesting. You want support 24/7. You want to make sure in the ongoing relationship, we're not letting you down, right? You need our help. We're there for you. In this relationship, when it comes to the visual, something very interesting happens. In the first two, we're bringing the product to you, right? We're making the product alive. It's literally what you're going to buy. And I would suggest anyone on this call, if you can play with the QR codes, do it. You will be surprised how realistic the products look in your space. It is literally, I think, very intuitive. And once you experience it once, it's going to be one of those things where, like, why don't I buy everything that way? Well, everything that makes sense for it. But in the service scenario, it's the flip side. You already have the product in front of you. That lawnmower sits in front of you, this very expensive professional unit. What you need to do is translate reality into the part numbers of the vendor. So that's also very fascinating, right? Because in this case, I need help from this vendor. Hey, I think it's the blades. Where are they? Oh, they look like that. I want to make a seamless experience to identify. You will educate me, and then I can basically pretty quickly educate it, click on the part, and it makes all the complexity behind the scenes go away. The part numbers, SKU numbers, I don't care about any of that. I need help now. Oh, identify, educate, thank you, click, and then it goes in and ideally shipped tomorrow, downtime done, and I can go on. So as a customer, I feel lots of love, because if I need help, I go to my sales rep powered by CPQ and Threekit. I can go to B2B, buy it at midnight, additional products. And if something goes bad, I can get education from the vendor and translating of their complex business processes with a cinch. So that's, as a customer, what I expect. Because frankly, I kind of get that from B2C customers, some of the products I'm buying. So my expectation is kind of, hey, I know it's a complex world in B2B, but hey, your job is to make it easy for me, right? Take care of me and I'll keep buying more. So those are the three examples. And just kind of tied all together with this slide is, when you're thinking of digital selling, and maybe next slide, please, and transforming your business, you absolutely must think of solutions that allow you to do that, but also keep thinking of the experience. And these building blocks add into that experience, which is 3D, augmented reality. And we didn't talk much about virtual photography, but it's an offshoot from 3D, which basically means if you want to generate 2D images out of those 3D models, a lot of customers still want that because you need to have on your website or whatever, basic documentation, you can auto-generate that. It's a very efficient way of doing that compared to photography or writing manuals, but the beginning really is 3D and AR. So with that, I would say we'll probably turn it over to some demos.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Matt. Thank you, Kylie. So with that being said, Matt did walk us or give an overview of a number of different types of use cases. So we'll try to see as much of that as possible. And so from the context of Threekit, as Matt described, there's a number of different use cases, whether it's directly on the customer's website, in a mobile app, or of course, as far as today's conversation is concerned, inside of Salesforce. So from that seat, we're going to take a look at a few different examples of Threekit working side by side with Salesforce. The first bit will be kind of from the seat of an internal sales rep configuring a quote for their customer inside of CPQ and using Threekit to drive that configuration. But then we'll switch over to the perspective of the customer and actually look at what is that document going to be that the customer receives, how do they interact with it from an augmented reality standpoint, and that'll be an opportunity for us to also interact with everyone on the call with that QR code that Matt was discussing, so that you can also test that same product in augmented reality. The customer will then move into B2B for a self-service and actual purchasing standpoint. But then ultimately, once that product is purchased, we need to maintain a record of that. What has the customer purchased over the course of their life cycle with us? And so we want to actually see those products, see those assets in the account for a service cloud standpoint, field service, or whatever it may be, depending on how that customer wants to continue interacting with those customers post-sale. So with that said, let's jump over into the demonstration itself. And again, our first kind of vignette here will be from that perspective of the internal sales rep inside of Salesforce CPQ. We can see I have my quote record here. I don't have any products yet, so we'll go ahead and just start adding products to my quote. And from an integration standpoint, Threekit is going to work side by side with all of CPQ's existing functionality. So the key one chiefly being where we're going to continue to work with that standard product catalog, so I can search for my products, I can filter my products the same way I always do in the context of CPQ. And whether this is an internal sales rep, again, or maybe a partner sales rep selling through or in a Salesforce community, Threekit will plug in directly to the standard CPQ that you're familiar with. But in this case, instead of taking me to that standard option selection screen that we can actually kind of see the background here, what we're using is CPQ's standard external configurator, and Threekit loading dynamically that product model directly into my CPQ configuration. So I can start to now do simple changes like maybe change the color of the system. Maybe I have different components, different parts that I want to target specifically. And now actually start to build out kind of that physical configuration of the product that we're actually selling here. So in the case of my credit card reader options, right? A very simple configuration change, but pretty important when it comes to the visual aspects, because now I know that this credit card reader is actually attached directly to the tablet of the point of sale system, as opposed to maybe somewhere else in the mounting system, for example. As I work my way through, again, even things like a column printer, where I can instantly see that I haven't actually changed the size or the structure of the point of sale system as it was without the printer, but adding that column printer directly into the existing hardware that was already there. A couple of different other printer options will, again, stick with that column printer. But even here, right, I've got my stability plates, but even simple attribute relationships as well. So not always visually, but in the case of maybe I want to mount this point of sale system directly to the counter, now that I no longer have that stability plate underneath, I have nothing to connect my additional connectivity hub to, and so that's why that option is now going to be removed entirely from my selections. So we'll bring the stability plate back, and we now see I have that additional option to add this secondary hub down below with additional plugs and ports for the point of sale machine. So again, with this being said, from a Threekit standpoint, we're looking at not just the visual configuration that's going to immediately communicate to the customer exactly what all those different parts and pieces that they're adding into their configuration look like, but also enforcing some of that traditional configuration logic with my attribute rules, dependencies, and so forth. But then taking that,
Tony, I think one thing to
yes.
highlight is, like, I think it's really cool. Like, I love this example, is that how many times have groups collaborate on a purchase, then to later find out, like, who decided on the ports being there, or did they not know that this or the other, because it's just not captured in the part number, you know, as best you can. It just doesn't capture all the attributes. And so that's, I think, the thing we're trying to share with crushing digital selling is that as we're working in CPQ together, you and I collaborating, we can not only inspect the technical integrity and all the other things, but also literally, is this the exact product that we want? And then share with third parties to come to a conclusion pretty quickly on it being exactly it, which the part number just won't share. It just won't give us all that richness.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Thank you, Matt. And so just kind of one final point here, as we kind of talk through this configuration, right, I only have a couple of different printers here, but the idea is that now I can dynamically build an entire configuration. So Threekit is going to kind of store each one of those individual parts and components as their own unique 3D model. And only when the user wants to configure it are we going to now bring that together into the full product. So again, whether I have 2 printers or 200 printers, Threekit is very dynamically going to allow you to now cycle through all of those potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of permutations of how your products can be configured. And then kind of taking that idea of that broad scale configuration, you'll notice in the background, right, I haven't actually defined any of my bundle properties in CPQ. And that's because Threekit is now just going to dynamically build that bundle for me. And we can see that here, automatically adding those additional components and adding those additional parts into my configuration and ultimately into my quote. So once I'm back in CPQ, of course, I can do anything from a commercial standpoint, whether there's special pricing, partner pricing, customer specific pricing, volume pricing, things of that sort. But what we'll do here is just very quickly fast forward. I want to preview the document, and then that'll also give us an opportunity to interact with that same 3D configuration from augmented reality. But so here again, this is the same document that we're going to send out to the customer. It's the same preview using the same Salesforce CPQ functionality. And inside of the document, what we want to do is whether we want to include kind of some of those 2D renders Matt was talking about, right, that virtual photographer, or in this case, if I want to just include a QR code. And I'll come back to this QR code here in a second, but if the customer is viewing this document on their desktop, they can grab their mobile phone, scan that QR code, and launch that directly into augmented reality. If they're viewing it from their mobile device, they can go ahead and just click that link and launch that same experience. So just very quickly to kind of bring us back to our slide, and again, I will show that QR code one more time, just so we can see where we've kind of rounded the bases. We'll get here to the customer proposal and then into B2B, and then we'll finish off with the quick Service Cloud test. So again, I'll pause here for for another, I don't know, 10 seconds or so, give everyone a chance to pull up their telephone. And this is, again, just using the standard camera app on your iPhone or your Android
I have
device.
mine right here, about to buy a point of system. And by the way, you can zoom in on the receipt. Oh, that's very cool, Kylie. You can zoom in on the receipt itself. And
Yeah.
it's obviously a Mickey Mouse receipt, or Pixar as we would call it. That's kind of fun. I hope that gives everyone like a sense of how detailed these are and how helpful.
Thank you for doing that, Matt. And just in case you didn't get a chance to actually pull out the phone and give it a shot, here's a quick recording again, that same document, right? The customer views it on their mobile phone, clicks on the link. It's going to send them directly to this this page with the configured product, which I now can launch directly in augmented reality.
Nice.
Move it around.
By the way.
Thank you.
Zoom in on that. Can you zoom in on that receipt? Oh no, we'll do that later.
And then, right, take pictures of it, share that with internally with other folks that need to make that decision when it comes to purchasing.
Yeah, totally. Like, imagine, like, again, I'm, not to interrupt you, but I mean, I've been selling for a living. The ability to forward this to Kylie give it to her team, and saying, hey, here's what we're thinking of, and very quickly come to consensus, just makes this a very, very potentially quick conversation. Yeah, that's the one we're looking for. Let's go. Everyone stands behind it. Color's right. Details are right. We want that column printer. It feels like, and by the way, we probably play with the ports in the back. It's got the right amount of ports. Let's do this.
Yep, spot on. And so with that being said, Matt, that takes us in kind of that next step of the journey, where now the customer is actually going to just click that link from the document and launch that directly into B2B Commerce. Right, so here I am in my B2B Commerce store. I can see I've got my shopping cart ready to go here. I've got all of those individual items. And then now, even once again, before I actually proceed to checkout, right, maybe as a customer, I want to take a look at that point of sale system one more time. And so again, just kind of carrying that idea of visualization and 3D configuration all the way through, from the initial kind of internal sales motion through kind of a pit stop with augmented reality, and now even when it comes to actually checking this out in the B2B Commerce store, viewing my product, viewing exactly what was configured, and now having all of those items inside of my shopping cart directly in B2B, so that I can actually make that purchase and fully check out and submit that order. So I know we're a little tight on time, so I'll just kind of flash one more final use case here. And again, that was going to be from the seat of, right, once everything is kind of processed and we've actually got this fully provisioned and fulfilled, and the customer actually owns that asset. Now we're kind of back from that seat of, maybe it's a service rep, customer support, maybe it's field service, whatever it may be. But I can see here right now, I'm back on my account. And once we kind of going back to the CPQ land, right, once I've kind of ordered that opportunity and contracted that order, right, oftentimes we'll talk about, right, the creation of contracts and subscriptions, but in the CPQ world, and especially around recurring revenue, sometimes we forget about those assets, right, those one-time items. But from our standpoint, where we're talking about that ongoing relationship with the customer, we're now, right, maybe it's maintenance contracts, maybe it's spare parts, right? So kind of that use case that Matt and Kylie were talking about earlier. Here I am directly in my asset record, living inside of the account. And I can see here, I've got this little area here for my, what we're calling the digital twin. And so once again, kind of loading that same configured product. So it's exactly what the customer has purchased. I have my column printer. I have those additional ports on my connectivity hub. And whether this is, again, a support rep inside of Service Cloud, who maybe as I go through, right, maybe that column printer that we've been talking about, maybe that column printer broke, or maybe my stability plate broke, right? I can go ahead, or maybe even just the column connector as I click around, and we can see those items be highlighted, right? So maybe the support rep needs to go and create a case. Once it's in Salesforce, do I need to create a work order to have a field service technician go out and actually replace this part? Maybe it needs to go to CPQ to create a spare parts quote. Or maybe, again, this is still exposed directly in B2B, and the customer can view their assets from B2B or community, and the customer can now directly order or submit those cases when it comes to the life expectancy of their products and getting those spare parts. So with that, Matt, I don't know if you have any other kind of final comments or additional color.
Thank you, Tony. It's wonderful. Thanks for showing all that. And by the way, I mean, my only challenge would be to everybody, if you have customers who want to buy from you today faster, you know, are you letting him? Are you letting them? Not him, but them. You know, this is broken. I need this part. How fast can I get it? I need to self-service this. I want to talk to a rep. I need a quote tomorrow. I want to buy. I know what I want, you know? So that's the challenge now. But thank you, Tony. Back to
thank you, Matt. And I'll pass it back to Carly to bring us home.
Yeah, what an awesome demo. Thank you so much, Tony. It's an amazing immersive experience. So I think, you know, like all that's all great. And just in conclusion, you know, what we really wanted to kind of clarify is like, well, why does all of this matter really? And I think there's a couple of big things. So one, firstly, everything that you've seen this morning, especially through that last demo, is that really this is about selling solutions. You're offering a complete solution to a customer and you're engaging them throughout that process. And what that means is you're going to end up with more satisfied customers. And with more satisfied customers, you're going to have more opportunities for greater customer LTV. So financially, this matters. I think the other thing, as you sort of look through all of this, is this is about kind of automation throughout all of those different sales channels. And what that does when you're talking about that automation and really guiding both the rep and the customer through that sales process, what you're going to get is a couple of other things. So you're going to get faster sales cycles. Faster sales cycles means ultimately you're going to get faster close rates, better close rates, and you're also going to improve your time to close. And I think as Matt sort of talked about as well, greater accuracy throughout that quoting process and that solution selling process means you're going to end up with less returns on the other side. So all of this makes good financial sense. Outside of that, the last one really to think about here is all of this is about end-to-end controls and standards from sales all the way through to finance. And when you have all of those controls and standards in place and that one single view of your customer and that one kind of data accuracy all the way through, what you're going to end up with is obviously, you know, faster cycles, but really think about it also through the lens of less chances of human error. And less chances of human error means you're going to end up with less customer discrepancies, which is also great from a customer experience point of view. But it also means there's less opportunities for you to lose revenue throughout every step of the way. So this is really also about minimizing your revenue leakage and ultimately improving your number of days of sales outstanding. So all of this end-to-end impacts on a number of bottom line metrics that in a time of like, how do we accelerate return to growth, I think are really important. So that kind of wraps it up. I think we are kind of right on time. I don't know if we have time, Dana, for a couple of questions or whatnot, but I think that covers all of the content we had for this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tony, Matt, and Kylie. This was a great session. I think we are at time, but I think we maybe have time for just one quick question and then we'll kind of wrap it up. The question that did come in through the chat, and if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in. We'll probably answer them offline after the fact. But the one that I think might make sense to answer right now is, how are B2B companies handling this kind of shift to digital differently than a typical B2C company? And, you know, Matt, Kylie, I'll kind of let you guys maybe take a quick answer for that one.
Kylie, you want to go? Should I go?
You go, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. I think B2C has been, when it comes to digital sales and I think visualization, I think in general, it's accelerating massively in B2C, but that group has had, I would say, a head start already, have been engaged those topics for a little bit longer. My read on the situation is what we're seeing is that B2B is actually, relatively speaking, moving even faster because with COVID, it's become this really big topic now and customers expect it. So, and that group probably has less experience. So what we're seeing is great demand, a lot of catching up to do in terms of thought leadership thinking. And so it's an exciting space. And my advice would be to, if you can maybe save yourself some hard lessons and to look for good advice in that world because it's real. And yeah, you can overcome some blunders.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think consumer have been talking about omni-channel and delightful customer experiences for years. That's my background. And God, 15 years ago, we were talking about this. But what I would say is in the B2B space, the stakes are higher, because as you can see, even just through this demo, right, like the process, the kind of the level of decisions you need to make and the complexity of the sale is so much higher than what it is in the consumer realm. And so I think that, you know, B2B customers are coming off a lower baseline, but I think now that the standard's been set, they're moving at a really accelerated pace to try and kind of leapfrog almost in some ways the standard set by B2C. And I'd say that the other part of this is, and we've sort of again talked about this a lot today, is it's not that B2B businesses are not just thinking about it through the lens of delightful experiences through that kind of front end or that touch point, but also thinking about transforming their business models as they go to set themselves up for kind of those recurring business models. And I think that's a huge trend that we're seeing certainly in the B2B space, which I think the consumer space has probably been a little hit and miss on that space. So it's definitely a B2B driver there.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I think we are over time, so I think it makes sense to kind of wrap up here. Matt, Kylie, Tony, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I think this was a great session. For anyone still on the line, we will have someone follow up with you to see if any questions came out of this session, so be on the lookout for that. But otherwise, again, thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Kylie. Thanks all.